Lessons on eating, wisdom, gratitude, and God's grace. Hello, and welcome to this week's broadcast. As Thanksgiving approaches, a time when we gather to share meals and celebrate our blessings, I find myself reflecting on a powerful question. What does the Bible teach us about eating? I remember a Thanksgiving years ago when my family sat around the table sharing stories and laughter. The food was plentiful, but what truly stayed with me was the warmth of connection and the sense of gratitude in that moment. It reminded me that eating isn't just about satisfying hunger. In the Bible, meals often teach us about trust, gratitude, discipline, and love. From Esau trading his birthright for a bowl of stew to Jesus feeding the multitudes, the act of eating carries profound spiritual meaning. Today we'll dive into these stories to uncover lessons that can guide us, not just during Thanksgiving, but in our daily lives. So grab your favorite warm drink and let's reflect together on how eating can inspire us to live wisely, gratefully, and generously. 1. Esau and the birthright. The danger of impulsive desires. Genesis 25:29-34. Context. Esau's story isn't just about a man who was hungry, it's about a man who was overwhelmed by the moment. Esau traded his birthright, a sacred inheritance of God's covenantal blessings, for a bowl of stew. His hunger wasn't merely physical, it reflected his inability to see beyond the present. Deeper insights. Short-term desires versus long-term blessings. Picture Esau stumbling into the kitchen, exhausted and ravenous. The stew must have smelled incredible, rich, savory, comforting. In that moment, his hunger drowned out everything else. He saw only the immediate gratification and dismissed the eternal value of his birthright. Reflection. How often do we let our own hunger, whether for comfort, success, or convenience, overshadow the greater blessings God has in store? What sacred gifts are we tempted to trade for temporary satisfaction? The role of discipline. Esau's story teaches us the importance of self-control, a fruit of the Spirit. Galatians 5:22-23. Without it, even good desires can lead us astray. Reflection. The next time you feel an overwhelming urge, whether it's emotional eating, reacting in anger, or making a hasty decision, pause. Ask yourself, am I acting out of trust in God or out of impulse? Thanksgiving application. When you sit down to your Thanksgiving meal, approach it as a celebration, not just of abundance, but of restraint and gratitude. Avoid overindulgence. Instead, savor the meal and take time to thank God for both physical and spiritual nourishment. Reflect on the long-term blessings in your life and pray for the wisdom to value them above fleeting desires. 2. Manna in the wilderness. Trusting God's provision. Exodus 16:16-20. Context. Imagine being in the Israelites' sandals. Freed from slavery, you're now wandering through the wilderness, unsure where your next meal will come from. Then God provides manna, bread from heaven. But some hoard it, driven by fear that tomorrow's provision won't come. Their hoarded manna spoils, teaching them and us an important lesson about trust. Deeper insights. God's provision is enough. Manna reminds us that God's provision is sufficient for today. We're called to trust Him for tomorrow too. But how often do we hoard money, possessions, even opportunities out of fear that there won't be enough? Reflection. Think about a time when you tried to store up something in your life, only for it to weigh you down or spoil. How can you trust God to meet your needs, one day at a time? The consequences of greed. Hoarded manna rotted. This mirrors the corruption of greed in our lives. It not only spoils what we've hoarded, but also corrodes our spirit. Consider how modern consumerism encourages us to always want more. More food, more things, more success. But what is the cost? Reflection. What are you holding on to that may be rotting manna in your life? Is it fear, possessions, or unhealthy habits that you need to release. Thanksgiving application. This Thanksgiving, focus on what God has given today and resist the temptation to overindulge or overprepare. Trust that God's provision is enough. Practice generosity. Share what you have with someone in need. A full heart is often the best proof of God's abundance. 3. The Lord's Supper. Consideration for others. 1 Corinthians 11:20-34. Context. In Corinth, the Lord's Supper became a source of division rather than unity. Some ate greedily while others went hungry. Paul reminded them that meals are sacred acts meant to reflect God's love and consideration for others. Deeper insights. Eating as worship. Eating is never just physical. It's an act of connection with God and others. Paul's rebuke reminds us to honor God and value others at the table. Reflection. What would it look like if every meal became a moment of gratitude, worship, and connection? Do your meals reflect love for God and others, or are they rushed and transactional? Community over individualism. Paul calls us to consider others before ourselves. In a culture that often prizes individualism, this message is countercultural. Meals aren't just about satisfying hunger, they're about building relationships. Reflection. Who in your life might need a seat at your table this Thanksgiving? Thanksgiving. Application. Invite someone who might be alone this Thanksgiving. Make space at your table for fellowship, generosity, and love. As you share your meal, pause to reflect on the unity and gratitude that Christ modeled for us in the Lord's Supper. 4. Jesus and meals, a model of grace and fellowship. Luke 19:1-10, Matthew 14:13-21. Context. Jesus shared meals in ways that shocked people. He ate with sinners, broke bread with his disciples, and fed thousands with just a few loaves and fish. For Jesus, meals were never just about food. They were about revealing God's grace. Deeper insights. Meals as ministry. Picture Jesus sitting at a table with tax collectors and sinners, laughing, talking, and extending love in ways that defied cultural norms. Every meal he shared became an opportunity to connect hearts and reveal God's grace. Reflection. How can your meals become moments of ministry, whether through deep conversations, forgiveness, or simple acts of kindness? The miracle of provision. When Jesus fed the 5,000, he took what seemed small and made it more than enough. This reminds us to bring whatever we have to God, trusting Him to multiply it for His glory. Reflection. What small loaves in your life can you surrender to God, trusting Him to provide abundantly? Thanksgiving application. Approach your Thanksgiving meal as Jesus did, with an open heart, ready to share love, grace, and fellowship. Reflect on how God has multiplied even the smallest blessings in your life this year. Conclusion. As you gather around the table this Thanksgiving, let the act of eating remind you of God's provision, inspire gratitude, and deepen your commitment to living wisely and generously. From Esau's impulsiveness to the Israelites' distrust, and from Paul's call to unity to Jesus' example of grace, the Bible teaches us that meals are sacred opportunities to reflect God's love. Thank you for joining me today. If you found this message meaningful, I encourage you to share it with someone who might need a little inspiration. Let's use this Thanksgiving season not just to fill our stomachs, but to fill our hearts with wisdom, gratitude, and generosity. May God's grace fill your table, your home, and your heart. Happy Thanksgiving, and God bless. And God.
As we gather round the table, blessings overflow through the simple act of eating. God's grace we come to know. traded his birthright for a fleeting taste, a lesson in patience we dare not waste. Hunger's call, it tempts the soul, but God's blessings are worth more than gold. Oh, the table is sacred, a place of grace, where trust and love leave their trace. With every bite let us see God's provision flows abundantly. In the wilderness, manna fell from above, a daily sign of the Father's love. But greed can spoil what trust provides. Hold fast to faith and joy abides. Oh, the table is sacred, a place of grace, where trust and love leave their trace. With every bite let us see God's provision flows abundantly. Break bread with the lonely, the broken, the poor. Let the table's fellowship open the door. Like Jesus with sinners, we're called to embrace, sharing love and His endless grace. Oh, the table is sacred, a place of grace, where trust and love leave their trace. With every bite let us see God's provision flows abundantly. May our meals reflect His love and lead us to His heart above.